The late afternoon sun hung low over the Mississippi, casting a golden sheen across the water that shimmered like spilled honey. New Orleans hummed in the distance, car horns bleating faintly, a steamboat whistle cutting through the haze. But here, on the rickety wooden porch of Salt Soul, the world felt smaller, softer, like it had paused just for this moment. The air smelled thick with gumbo simmering in the kitchen, a rich tangle of smoked sausage, cayenne, and celery, mingling with the sharp tang of faux broth bubbling on a second stove. A warm breeze rustled the string lights dangling from the eaves, their soft glow flickering against the weathered planks of the little riverside joint. It wasn't too much a squat, single-story shack with peeling paint and a slanted roof, but today, it was everything. Lila Moreau stood at the edge of the porch, barefoot on the cool wood, her wedding dress catching the light like something out of a dream. It wasn't the stiff, beaded gown you'd expect from a millionaire heiress. No lace, no train, just a simple cotton number that hugged her slender frame and flared out at the knees, the hem brushing her ankles. The fabric glowed ivory against her sun-kissed skin, and the neckline dipped just enough to show the delicate curve of her collarbone. Her blonde hair, usually pinned back in a tight, businesslike bun, spilled loose over her shoulders in soft waves, catching the golden hour like a halo. She was radiant, tall and graceful, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of a storm-soaked sky, gray-blue and piercing. A single wildflower, plucked from the riverbank, was tucked behind her ear, its purple petals trembling in the breeze. She held a chipped ceramic bowl of gumbo in her hands, steam curling up to kiss her face, and when she brought the spoon to her lips, her eyes fluttered shut, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Goddamn," she whispered, voice cracking as she swallowed. "The spicy, I can taste it, Remington. Every bite." Her lips parted in a shaky smile, and she laughed, a raw, unguarded sound that bounced off the water and made the handful of guests turn their heads. Remy, Big Rem Boudreaux, stood beside her, a good foot shorter and twice as wide, looking like he'd stumbled out of a cartoon and into a wedding he didn't quite fit. His suit, if you could call it that, was a sight to behold. A thrift store special, navy blue and a size too small. The jacket stretched tight across his barrel chest, the buttons straining like they might pop any second. The pants stopped an inch above his ankles, revealing scuffed black boots that looked more suited to a kitchen than a ceremony. His tie, a loud red thing with faded fleur-de-lis patterns, hung crooked, half untied, flapping against his round belly every time he shifted his weight. Sweat beaded on his forehead, plastering his dark hair to his scalp in damp clumps, and his cheeks were flushed red from the heat or maybe the bourbon he'd snuck earlier. At 5'5" and pushing 260 pounds, Remy was a walking contradiction to Lila's elegance, his bulk spilling over the edges of the suit in a way that was almost comical. But when he grinned, that wide, gap-toothed grin that lit up his whole face, he looked like the happiest man alive. Damn the fit of the clothes. "Told ya, Cher," he said, voice rough and thick with that Cajun drawl, deep as the river itself. "I put my whole soul in that pot, spicy enough to wake you up." "Huh?" He reached up, his stubby fingers brushing her arm, and though he couldn't taste the gumbo himself, not anymore, his brown eyes sparkled like he could feel every note of it anyway. The crowd wasn't big, maybe 20 folks, scattered across the porch and the patchy grass out front. Jasper Jazz Coleman leaned against the railing, his lanky frame hunched over a battered saxophone, blowing a slow, soulful tune that curled through the air like smoke. His skinny tie hung loose, and his fedora tipped low over his bloodshot eyes. He'd been sober 3 weeks, a miracle for this wedding. Marie Thibodeau sat on a folding chair near the door, her thin frame draped in a faded floral dress, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She clutched a handkerchief, dabbing her eyes as she watched Remy and Lila, her lips trembling with a smile. Tessanguin bustled around the makeshift buffet, her black ponytail swinging as she ladled pho into bowls, her apron streaked with broth stains. A few regulars from the old days, dock workers, street musicians, a grizzled fisherman with a missing tooth lounged on the grass, sipping beers and passing a plate of cornbread. The ceremony itself had been quick, no fuss, no preacher, just Remy and Lila facing each other, hands clasped, words spilling out raw and real. I ain't good with fancy promises. Remy had started, scratching the back of his neck, his suit creaking as he shifted. But I swear I'll cook for you every damn day. Lila, keep you fed, keep you laughing, keep you mine. Took a hell of a ride to get here, but I do it all again. His voice broke on the last word, and he ducked his head, that big belly jiggling as he tried to hide the flush creeping up his neck. Lila had squeezed his hands, her long fingers wrapping around his thick, calloused ones. I never thought I'd taste anything food, love, life till you, she said, her gray-blue eyes locked on his. You gave me that, Rem, more than I deserved. I'm here for real till the end. She leaned down way down to kiss him then, her lips brushing his sweaty forehead first, then finding his mouth, and the crowd had hooped, Jez hitting a high note that made the dogs downriver bark. Now, post-vows, they stood together, the gumbo bowl still in Lila's hands. She took another spoonful, slower this time, savoring the heat that prickled her tongue, the smoky depth of the roux, the bite of the sausage. Jesus, Rem, she murmured, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. How do you make it this good when you can't even taste it? Remy chuckled, a low rumble that shook his whole frame. His jacket seems groaning in protest. Told ya, babe, I've got it up here. He tapped his temple with a thick finger, smudging a streak of flour across his forehead. Mom taught me every trick, burned it into me. Don't need my tongue when my head is full of her. He paused, his grin softening, and for a moment, his eyes drifted to the wall behind them, 3 faded photos in chipped wooden frames. Claude Moreau, Émile Lebeau, and Adele Boudreaux, smiling from another time, their faces weathered but peaceful. Marie stood then, her chair scraping the porch as she shuffled over, handkerchief clutched tight. Adele be ballin' right now, she said, voice raspy with age. She always said you'd find your way, Remy through the fire and all. And you, she turned to Lila, reaching out a bony hand to touch her arm. Your daddy be proud, girl. Took a lot of hell to get here, didn't he it? Lila nodded, her throat tight, and set the bowl down on a wobbly table nearby. Yeah, she said softly, glancing at Remy. More than you know. The words hung heavy, a shadow flickering across her face, something unspoken. A story buried in the months before this day. Tessa popped up beside them, balancing a tray of faux bowls, her small frame dwarfed by the load. Why all gonna stand there all mushy or eat? She teased, her accent a mix of southern twang and Vietnamese lilt. I slaved over this broth, least you can do is try it, boss. She smirked at Lila, then shot Remy a look. And you, big guy, don't spill it on that suit. Looks like it's about to bust. Ah, shut it, Tess. Remy fired back, snagging a bowl with a clumsy grab that nearly tipped the tray. This suit is a damn classic, makes me look sharp. He puffed out his chest, the jacket stretching so tight a button pinged off, bouncing across the porch. Jazz snorted mid-note, and the crowd erupted in laughter, Lila included, her hand flying to her mouth. Sharp like a meat cleaver, maybe, she said, still giggling as she took her own bowl of pho. She sipped the broth, the warmth spreading through her, and her eyes widened. Holy Remy, you've got competition. This is unreal. Tessa beamed, flipping her ponytail. Told you pho's my game. You two can keep the gumbo. She darted back to the kitchen, leaving Remy and Lila shoulder to shoulder, or rather, her shoulder to his head, given the height gap. Jazz finished his tune, the last note lingering as he lowered the sax. All right, lovebirds, he called, voice rough from too many late nights. Why allow me a dance and a big ol' bowl of that gumbo. Made it through the sober, so pay up. He tipped his fedora, grinning wide. Remy lumbered over, his boots thudding on the planks, and slung an arm around Lila's south waist, or as close as he could get, his hand settling somewhere around her hip. Dance, huh? He said, winking up at her. Gonna look like a damn circus act with me down here. Share. Good, Lila shot back, setting her bowl aside and pulling him toward the open patch of grass. I like a circus. She moved first, swaying to the faint hum of jazz, picking up a slower melody, her dress swishing around her legs. Remy followed, his steps clumsy and heavy, his belly bouncing with every shuffle, the suit creaking like it might give up entirely. They didn't match her grace against his lumbering bulk, but they fit, somehow, in a way that made the crowd hush for a beat, watching. Marie leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Look at M," she muttered to no one in particular. Claude and Emile D never believed this hell. Adele neither. Took a lot of blood to get here. Out on the grass, Lila bent down mid-step, her face level with Remy S, and kissed him again, soft, lingering, her hands cupping his sweaty cheeks. "We made it," she whispered against his lips, her voice barely audible over the sax. "Damn right we did," he rasped back, pulling her closer, his tie flapping loose. "But it wasn't no cakewalk, was it?" She shook her head, a flicker of something dark crossing her eyes. Pain? Maybe, or memory. "No," she said quietly, "it wasn't tea." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the river red, the music carried them into the night, a promise sealed in spice and sweat, with a hell of a story still untold. The rain came down in sheets, a relentless gray curtain that turned New Orleans into a sodden blur of neon and shadow. It was late past midnight, the kind of hour where the city's pulse slowed to a low, restless hum. Down by the Mississippi, where the river lapped at the muddy banks, Remy Big Rem, Boudreaux hunched inside his beat-up food truck, the air thick with the smell of burnt beignet batter and cheap bourbon. The truck was a relic, rust streaking the sides, one headlight busted, the awning sagging under the weight of the downpour. Inside, it was a cramped mess. A greasy countertop littered with onion peels and empty beer cans, a single gas burner hissing faintly, its blue flame licking at a blackened skillet. The vinyl seat was torn, springs poking through, and the radio crackled with static, barely spitting out a garbled blues tune between bursts of interference. Rain drummed on the roof, a steady thump-thump that rattled the loose bolts and drowned out the world beyond the fogged-up windshield. Remy slouched against the counter, his bulk spilling over the edges of a stool that creaked under his 260 pounds. He was a sight 5'5", round as a barrel, his faded Saints t-shirt stretched tight across his gut, stained with grease and sweat. His dark hair stuck to his forehead in damp clumps, and a 3-day scruff shadowed his jaw, patchy where it met his double chin. A half-empty bottle of Jim Beam dangled from his thick fingers, the amber liquid sloshing as he tipped it to his lips, grimacing at the burn. His brown eyes, bloodshot from too many late nights, squinted at the skillet where a lone beignet sizzled, its edges charred black. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, voice gravelly with that Cajun lilt, thick as swamp mud. He poked at the dough with a spatula, flipping it over to reveal a soggy, ruined mess. "Ain't worth the grease it's fryin' in." The truck's door rattled then, a sharp bang that cut through the rain's roar, and Remy jolted, nearly dropping the bottle. "We're closed, asshole," he bellowed, wiping his hands on his jeans, the denim frayed at the knees. "Go get your damn pa-boys somewhere else." The banging came again, harder, insistent, and he cursed under his breath, lumbering off the stool with a groan. His boots scuffed and caked with old mud thudded against the floor as he shuffled to the window, yanking the shutter open with a squeal of rusted hinges. Lila Moreau stood outside, soaked to the bone, her figure framed by the dim glow of a flickering streetlight. She was striking even in the mess of it, tall and lean, her blonde hair plastered to her face in wet strands, water streaming down her sharp cheekbones and dripping off her chin. Her gray-blue eyes glinted with something fierce, cutting through the rain like a blade. She wore a tailored blazer and skirt, the kind of outfit that screamed boardroom, but the fabric clung to her now, dark and heavy, the hem of her skirt splattered with mud. Her heels' sleek black pumps were sinking into the soggy ground, and she clutched a leather briefcase under one arm, the other hand raised to shield her face from the downpour. She looked like she'd walked straight out of a corporate high-rise and into a hurricane, and yet there was a fire in her stance, a stubborn tilt to her jaw that said she wasn't leaving. "Remy Boudreaux?" she called, her voice clear and sharp despite the storm, slicing through the drumming rain. "I need to talk to you now." Remy blinked, bourbon fuzzing his brain, and leaned out the window, his belly pressing against the sill. "Lady, you lost or something?" Antino 5-star joint here, just a fat guy and a burnt beignet. Beat it. He started to slam the shutter, but she lunged forward, jamming her hand against it, her nails scraping the metal. I'm not here for food, she snapped, water dripping from her lashes as she glared up at him. I'm here for you. I've got a deal, name your price. He snorted, a rough laugh rumbling out of him, shaking his gut. Price, huh? Auntie got shit worth buyin', share. Truck S half dead, and I'm $3 from broke. Try the casino, they LL take your fancy purse. He waved a hand at her briefcase, the leather gleaming wet under the streetlight. Lila didn't flinch, her eyes narrowing as she stepped closer, mud sucking at her heels. I'm not some tourist, she said, voice low and steady. I know who you are, Big Rem, king of the gumbo game till you flushed it down the drain. I need that gumbo, the kind Cajun King suing me over. They say I stole their recipe, and I've got 3 months to prove I didn't or lose everything. She paused, wiping rain from her face, her blazer clinging to her shoulders like a second skin. Moreau Foods, my company. Ever heard of it? Remy's grin faded, his hand tightening on the bourbon bottle. Moreau Foods, hell, who hadn't heard of it? The big shot outfit that churned out spices and frozen gumbo for every supermarket from here to Texas. He'd seen their ads on late-night TV, some slick voice droning about authentic Cajun flavor while he flipped burgers for drunks. Yeah, he said slowly, squinting at her. So you're the rich chick who owns it. What's that got to do with me? Everything. She shot back, her voice rising over a crack of thunder. Cajun King got me by the throat. Lawsuit says my gumbo a rip-off of theirs. I need something new, something they can't touch, for the taste of the Bayou Festival. Win that and I'm clear. You're the best gumbo man this city's ever seen. I've heard the stories. I'll pay you $1 million to cook it for me. The number hit him like a punch, and for a second, he just stared, bourbon halfway to his mouth. Rain splattering his face from the open window. $1 million. He could see it paying off the bookies who'd been hounding him since the poker tables chewed him up, fixing the truck, maybe even getting out of this damn river stink for good. But then he laughed again, louder this time, a belly-shaking roar that made the stool behind him wobble. $1 million, huh? He said, wiping his eyes with a greasy sleeve. You think I'm some kind of Michelin star sellout? Lady, I don't cook for green, the first cook for guts. You want my gumbo, you gotta give me something real. Lila's jaw tightened, water streaming down her neck as she straightened up, her heels sinking deeper. Fine, she said, voice sharp as a knife. Name it. What's real to you? Remy leaned out further, his bulk straining the window frame, rain soaking his shirt. He grinned, wide and crooked, his gap tooth flashing. You, he said, pointing the bourbon bottle at her. I want you, legal, marry me, 6 months, living in my kitchen, cooking with me. No cash, no bullshit, just you and me, hitched. That's my price. The words hung there, heavy and absurd, swallowed by the rain for a beat before Lila's eyes widened, her mouth parting in shock. What? She sputtered, stepping back so fast she nearly slipped, her briefcase thudding into the mud. You're drunk or crazy. Marriage? For gumbo? Take it or leave it. Share, Remy said, shrugging his broad shoulders, the t-shirt riding up to show a sliver of hairy belly. Antino $1 million gonna fix what I lost, my name, my game, my soul. You wanna bring me back, you gotta jump in the pot with me. 6 months, cook, fight, whatever it takes. Deal? She stared at him, rain pounding her skull, her blazer sagging under the weight of the storm. He was a mess, fat, loud, reeking of booze and failure, his truck a rolling junk heap. But those stories she heard, whispered in dive bars and back kitchens, echoed in her head. Big Rem, the gumbo god, the man who could make a pot sing like a choir. Cajun King had her company on the ropes. Victor Lebeau's lawyers were sharks, circling for blood. She'd lose it all, her dad's legacy, the empire she'd fought to hold together since he died in that crash. And here was this sweaty, ridiculous lump of a man, offering her a lifeline if she could stomach the cost. Lightning split the sky, illuminating his face, those brown eyes sharp now, cutting through the bourbon haze, daring her. She clenched her fists, mud oozing between her fingers, and took a deep breath, the rain cold against her lips. "You're insane," she said, voice trembling but firm. "But I'm desperate. 6 months legal, no funny business unless I say so. You cook, I win, we're done. That's it." Remy's grin stretched wider, his belly jiggling as he raised the bottle in a mock toast. "Done," he said, voice booming over the thunder. "Welcome to the shit show, Mrs. Boudreaux. Better buckle up, gumbo ain't the only thing that's gonna burn." He slammed the shutter closed, leaving her standing there, drenched and stunned, the deal sealed in the downpour. Inside, he slumped back onto the stool, the bourbon sloshing as he took a long swig, his heart thudding under the layers of fat. "Well, Mom," he muttered to the empty truck, glancing at a faded photo taped to the wall, Adele smiling over a steaming pot. "Guess I'm back in the game. Hope you're watching." Outside, Lila stood frozen, rain hammering her shoulders, her mind racing with the insanity she'd just signed up for, a marriage to a stranger. A gamble on a dish, a shot at saving everything she had left. The river churned beside her, dark and restless, mirroring the storm she'd just stepped into. The Mississippi rolled slow and muddy beyond the high windows of Lila Moreau's riverside mansion, its surface glinting under a weak morning sun that barely cut through the haze of last night's storm. The house itself was a relic of old New Orleans, money whitewashed, with stretching 3 stories high, wraparound porches dripping with ivy, and a slate roof that gleamed wet from the rain. Inside, the kitchen was a stark contrast to Remy's truck. Sleek granite counters, stainless steel appliances humming quietly, a double oven big enough to roast a hog. But now, a week after their rain-soaked deal, it looked like a war zone. And pots of gumbo simmered on every burner, their lids rattling with steam, filling the air with a heavy mix of roux, sausage, and cayenne that clung to the walls. Onion skins littered the floor, a sack of okra spilled across the island, and a greasy cast iron skillet smoked faintly where Remy had left it, still sizzling with bacon drippings. Remy, Big Rem Boudreaux, stood in the middle of it all. A tornado of a man dwarfed by the high ceilings but dominating the space with his sheer bulk. At 5'5" and 260 pounds, he was a walking contradiction to the kitchen's pristine design, his faded Saints t-shirt stretched tight over his round belly, jeans sagging low under the weight of it, stained with flour and grease. His dark hair stuck up in sweaty spikes, and his cheeks were flushed red from the heat, a 3-day scruff shadowing his jaw. He gripped a wooden spoon like a club, stirring a bubbling pot with one hand while the other waved a half-empty beer can, sloshing foam onto the counter. His boots, scuffed and muddy, tracked dirt across the tile, and every move he made sent his gut jiggling, a rhythmic bounce that matched the clatter of pots and pans. "See, share. Gumbo-esque like life," he said, voice booming over the hiss of the burners, thick with that Cajun drawl. "You gotta let it simmer, rush it, and it's just soup with an attitude." He leaned over the pot, sniffing deep, his belly brushing the stove's edge, and grinned, gap tooth flashing. "This one's got soul, feel that heat coming up?" Lila stood across the island, arms crossed. Her gray-blue eyes narrowed as she watched him turn her kitchen into a disaster. She was a vision even in her frustration, tall and lean, blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that showed off her sharp cheekbones, dressed in a crisp white blouse and jeans that hugged her legs. She swapped her soaked blazer for something practical, but the tension in her jaw said she was still the corporate queen under it all. "Soulless great, Remy," she said, voice dry as she dodged a splash of broth. "But if you burn my house down, we're screwed before we even start. Can you at least use a damn cutting board?" He chuckled, a low rumble that shook his frame, and waved the beer can at her. "Cutting board S for Sissy's real cook's chop on the fly." He grabbed an onion from the pile, slicing it straight on the counter with a dull knife, bits flying everywhere. "Relax, Mrs. Boudreaux, you wanted me, you got me. Mess and all." "Don't call me that," she snapped, snatching a rag to wipe up the mess, her movements quick and sharp. "This isn't a real marriage, it's a contract. 6 months, gumbo, win. That's it." She tossed the rag into the sink, her lips pressing into a thin line as she glared at him. "And maybe try not turning my kitchen into a swamp." "Huh?" Remy grinned wider, unfazed, and took a swig of beer, foam dripping down his chin. Swamp S where the good stuff grows, share. You'll see gumbo S gonna save your fancy ass. He turned back to the pot, humming off key, his belly swaying as he stirred, oblivious to the chaos he wrought. The piece, or whatever passed for it, shattered an hour later when the roar of engines cut through the morning quiet. Lila froze mid-sentence. She'd been lecturing Remy about cleaning up her head, snapping toward the window. Outside, 3 pickup trucks screeched to a stop in the gravel drive, their tires spitting mud, doors slamming as half a dozen men piled out. Big guys, rough around the edges, tattoos snaking up their arms, baseball caps pulled low, one swinging a crowbar like it was a toy. They headed straight for Remy's food truck, parked crooked by the garage, its rust-streaked shell still dripping from last night's rain. Shit, Remy muttered, dropping the spoon into the pot with a splash. He lumbered to the window, his bulk pressing against the glass, beer can clanking on the sill. LeBeau's goons knew that bastard wouldn't wait long. Lila's eyes widened, her hand gripping the counter. Victor? What the hell is he doing here? She darted to his side, peering out as the men circled the truck, their voices muffled but sharp with menace. Payback, Remy said, voice low, his grin gone. Owes me from the old days, thinks I'm selling out to you. Guess he's making a point. He shoved past her, boots thudding as he bolted for the door, his belly bouncing with every step. Stay here. Share, I got this. Like hell I will. She shot back, grabbing a rolling pin from the counter. Not much, but better than nothing, and chasing after him, her ponytail swinging. They burst onto the porch just as the first blow landed, a sickening crunch of metal as the crowbar smashed through the truck's windshield, glass spraying across the gravel. Hey! Remy roared, charging down the steps, his voice a thunderclap that cut through the morning. Get your filthy hands off my rig, you sons of bitches. He moved faster than his size suggested, barreling toward the nearest guy, a wiry thug with a shaved head and a lip ring who swung a tire iron at him. Remy ducked, barely, the iron grazing his shoulder, and tackled the guy with his full weight, sending them both crashing into the mud. Lila skidded to a stop on the porch, rolling pin raised, her heart pounding as chaos erupted. Another goon, a hulking brute with a beard, grabbed Remy from behind, slamming a fist into his face. Blood spurted from his nose, staining his shirt, and his left eye swelled shut in seconds, turning purple against his flushed skin. He grunted, swinging wild, his meaty fist catching the guy's jaw with a crack, but a third man jumped in, kicking his legs out from under him. Remy hit the ground hard, mud splashing up his back, his belly heaving as he gasped for air. Stop it! Lila shouted, leaping off the porch, her jeans soaking instantly in the wet grass. She swung the rolling pin at the bearded guy, catching him square in the ribs. He yelped, stumbling back, but the crowbar man turned on her, his eyes narrowing as he raised the weapon. Back off, lady, this ain't your fight. It's my damn fight now, she snarled, dodging a swing, her breath ragged. She glanced at Remy, sprawled in the mud, blood dripping down his chin, his good eye blazing as he struggled to stand. Remy, get up, he groaned, rolling onto his knees, mud caking his jeans, and lunged for the crowbar guy's legs, toppling him into the dirt. Ain't done yet, he wheezed, his voice thick with pain, his belly quivering as he pinned the man down. The other two hesitated, thrown off by Lila's rolling pin and Remy's stubborn bulk, but they didn't back off. They circled, waiting for an opening. Lila darted to the truck, her hands shaking as she yanked open the door and grabbed the one thing Remy hadn't lost in the chaos. His old cast iron pot, dented and scratched, still warm from last night's gumbo. She hefted it up, mud streaking her blouse, and swung it like a bat, smashing it into the bearded guy's shoulder as he lunged for Remy again. He howled, dropping to his knees, and the crowbar man bolted, yelling, "Let us go, LeBeau, I'll deal with them later." The pickups roared to life, tires spinning as they peeled out, leaving the truck a wreck, windshield shattered, side panels dented, awning torn clean off. Remy slumped against the wreckage, blood and mud smeared across his face, his chest heaving as he clutched his ribs. Lila dropped the pot, her hands trembling, and sank to her knees beside him, the rolling pin rolling into the grass. "Jesus, Rem," she said, voice breaking as she brushed mud from his cheek, her fingers smearing the blood instead. "You okay?" He coughed, a wet, painful sound, and spat into the dirt, his good eye squinting up at her. "Been better, Cher," he rasped, managing a crooked grin despite the swelling. "But I saved the pot, worth it." He nodded at the cast iron lump, dented but intact, lying in the mud like a trophy. Lila shook her head, a shaky laugh escaping her as she grabbed his arm, helping him sit up. His bulk leaned heavy against her, his shirt soaked with sweat and rain, but she didn't pull away. "You're insane," she muttered, wiping her muddy hands on her jeans. "They could killed you." "Nah," he said, wincing as he touched his nose, blood dripping onto his lap. "Takes more than a few punks to take me down. LeBeau's just flexin', he's scared you got me now." He looked at her, his bruised face softening. "You didn't have to jump in, why no? Coulda stayed clean." She met his gaze, her gray-blue eyes steady despite the chaos, mud streaking her blouse and hair. "Yeah, well," she said, voice quieter now, "you're not fighting alone anymore. Deal's a deal." She grabbed the pot, handing it to him, her fingers brushing his as he took it, his thick hand dwarfing hers. Remy stared at her for a beat, blood trickling down his chin, then nodded, his grin flickering back. "Guess we're in the shit together now, huh, Mrs. Boudreaux?" "Don't call me that," she said, but there was no bite in it this time, just a tired half-smile as she pulled him to his feet, his weight dragging them both through the mud toward the house. The truck was trashed, his face a mess, but something had shifted, something neither of them could name yet, born in the dirt and blood of a fight they hadn't seen coming. The kitchen of Lila Moreau's mansion smelled like a battlefield 3 days after Remy's truck got smashed, a heady clash of spices and tension. The air thick with the scent of simmering gumbo and the faint tang of bleach where Lila had scrubbed the counters raw. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low over the Mississippi, casting long shadows through the high windows that stretched across the hardwood floors. The chaos Remy had unleashed hadn't let up. Pots bubbled on every burner, their lids clattering like they were ready to blow, steam curling up to fog the glass panes. A sack of rice had tipped over on the island, grains crunching underfoot, and a greasy skillet sat abandoned, its edges crusted with burnt roux. Onion peels stuck to the tiles, and a jar of cayenne pepper lay on its side, a fine red dust coating the granite like blood spatter. Remy stood at the stove, a hulking figure dwarfed by the kitchen-esque grandeur but dominating it with his sheer presence. At 5'5" and 260 pounds, he was a mess of sweat and grit, his Saints t-shirt stretched tight over his round belly, damp patches blooming under his arms, jeans sagging low with fresh mud stains from the fight. His face was a roadmap of bruises, left eye swollen half shut, a purple ring circling it, nose still crusted with dried blood, a fresh cut on his lip oozing red. He gripped a wooden spoon, stirring a pot of gumbo with slow, deliberate swirls, his thick fingers smudged with flour. His dark hair stuck up in sweaty spikes, and his cheeks glowed red from the heat, a patchy scruff shadowing his jaw. Despite the beating, he hummed a low, off-key tune, his belly jiggling faintly with each sway, like he hadn't a care in the world. Lila leaned against the island, arms crossed, her gray-blue eyes sharp as she watched him work. She was a stark contrast, tall and lean, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that showed off her high cheekbones, dressed in a fresh blouse and jeans that hugged her legs. The mud from the fight was gone, but her hands still bore faint streaks of dirt under the nails, a reminder of the rolling pin she'd swung. She'd been pacing all morning, her voice tight with frustration as she tried to rein in Remy's chaos. But now she stood still, her lips pressed thin, studying him like a puzzle she couldn't crack. "Try this, Cher," Remy said, breaking the silence, his voice rough with that Cajun drawl, loud enough to cut through the hiss of the burners. He scooped a ladle of gumbo from the pot, dark and thick, flecked with sausage and okra, and poured it into a chipped bowl, steam curling up in lazy spirals. "Best batch yet, got that kick you'll feel in your bones." He slid it across the counter toward her, his bruised knuckles scraping the granite. his good eye glinting with something like pride. Lila hesitated, her arms uncrossing as she stepped closer, the bolus heat brushing her fingers as she took it. She lifted the spoon, her movements careful, almost reluctant, and brought it to her lips. The gumbo hit her tongue smoky, rich, with a slow burn that crept up her throat, and her face stayed blank. No flicker of reaction, just a quick swallow and a nod. "It's fine," she said, voice flat, setting the bowl down with a soft clink. "Spicy, I guess. Good enough." Remy's grin faltered, his spoon pausing mid-stir, and he squinted at her, the purple ring around his eye tightening. "Fine?" he echoed, voice dropping low, a hint of edge creeping in. "Share that damn near perfection sausage singin'. Rue deep as the river. You tellin' me fine like it's some gas station slop?" He leaned forward, his belly pressing against the stove, and grabbed a shaker of salt from the counter, shaking it over the bowl. "Here, taste it again. Wake them fancy taste buds up." Lila's jaw tightened, her hand shooting out to stop him, knocking the shaker aside with a clatter. "Don't," she snapped, sharper than she meant, her eyes flashing. "It's enough. Okay? Just leave it." She turned away, grabbing a rag to wipe the counter, her movements jerky, like she needed something to do with her hands. Remy stared at her, his good eye narrowing, the bruised one twitching as he set the spoon down with a thud. "Hold up," he said, voice slow, suspicious now. "You ain't tastin' it right, are you? All this gumbo, and you're actin' like it's water." He stepped around the island, his boots crunching rice grains, and snatched the bowl back, holding it up like evidence. "Spill it. Share what's the deal? You don't like my cookin'? Or you got some high-class palate I ain't hittin'?" Lila froze, rag clutched tight, her back to him as the steam from the pots swirled between them. Her shoulders tensed, and for a long moment, she didn't answer, the only sound the bubbling gumbo and the faint hum of the fridge. Then she turned, slow, her gray-blue eyes meeting his, and the fire in them was gone, replaced by something raw, something cracked open. "I can't taste it," she said, voice barely above a whisper, trembling at the edges. "Any of it. I haven't tasted a damn thing since I was 8, not gumbo, not salt, nothing." The words hung heavy, sinking into the kitchen's heat, and Remy's mouth dropped open, his bruised face slackening. "What?" he said, blinking like she slapped him, the bowl wobbling in his hand. "You're telling me you're blind on your tongue? How the hell you running a food company like that?" Lila's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "I fake it," she said, voice steadying now, cold and hard. "Since my dad died car crash, Victor Lebeau's fault. Hit my head, lost my taste, kept it quiet. Moreau Foods is his legacy. I've been lying my way through it for 20 years. That's why I need you." She took a step closer, her eyes locking on his, fierce again. "You're the real deal, Remy. I'm not." He set the bowl down slow, his thick fingers lingering on the edge, and rubbed his scruff with a grunt, processing. "Well, shit," he muttered, half to himself, his good eye darting over her face. "That's a hell of a secret, Cher. So all this," he waved a hand at the pots, the mess, the kitchen. "You're just guessing? Hoping I pull your ass out of the fire?" "Pretty much," she said, crossing her arms again, her ponytail swinging as she tilted her head. "Cajun King got me pinned. Victor says I stole their gumbo recipe, and I can't prove I didn't without something new. You're my shot. That's the deal." Remy snorted, a rough laugh breaking through his bruised lips, blood flaking off as he shook his head. "Damn, you're a piece of work," he said, leaning back against the counter, his belly brushing the edge. "But it don't add up. Victor's coming at you hard, busting up my truck. Ain't just a lawsuit, is it?" Before she could answer, the kitchen door creaked open, and Marie Thibodeau shuffled in. Her thin frame bent slightly, a faded shawl draped over her shoulders. Her gray hair was pulled tight in a bun, and her dark eyes flicked between them, sharp despite the lines creasing her face. She carried a small basket of peppers, their red skins gleaming, and set it on the island with a soft thud. "Heard the ruckus yesterday," she said, voice raspy, nodding at Remy's bruises. "Labo's boys? Huh? Figured they'd show up once you two teamed up." Lila turned, her brows knitting. "You know Victor?" Maria's lips thinned, and she pulled a chair over, sitting slow like her bones ached. "No more en him," she said, folding her hands over the basket. "Knew his daddy Emile worked for him and Claude Moreau back in the day at Bayou Sol. Little joint down by the docks. Best gumbo in town till it all went to hell." She paused, her eyes drifting to the window, lost in the river's haze. "Claude was your granddaddy, Lila him and Emile started it together 50-50. Till Claude took the recipe, claimed it as his own, kicked Emile out. Broke the man, drove him to drink, left him with nothing. Victor's been carrying that hate ever since." Lila's face paled, her arms dropping as she stepped closer, the rag slipping from her hand. "What?" she said, voice sharp, incredulous. "My grandfather stole it? That's why Victor's after me?" Marie nodded, her fingers tracing a pepper-esque curve. "Emile swore he'd get it back, died before he could. Victor took up the fight, thinks Moreau Foods is built on his daddy's blood. That crash with your pa? Warranty no accident. Victor wanted Henri gone, too. Now he's coming for you." The kitchen went quiet, the gumbo's bubble the only sound, steam rising like ghosts between them. Remy's good eye widened, his bruised face tightening as he glanced at Lila. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, slamming the beer can down, foam splashing. "So this ain't just business, it's a damn family feud? And I'm caught in the middle?" Lila didn't answer, her hands trembling as she turned away, pacing to the window, her reflection faint against the glass. "I didn't know," she said, voice low, cracking. "Dad never said nobody did. All this time, I thought." She trailed off, staring at the river, her shoulders hunching like the weight of it was crushing her. Marie stood, slow and deliberate, and shuffled to the counter, picking up the gumbo bowl Lila had barely touched. "You ought to know the rest," she said, dipping a spoon in and tasting it herself, her lips smacking softly. "Claude kept a journal down in that fancy wine cellar of yours. Check it if you don't believe me. But Victor ain't stoppin' truck's just the start." She set the bowl down, her eyes flicking to Remy. "You're in deep now, boy. Hope you're ready." Remy rubbed his scruff, wincing as his fingers brushed the cut on his lip, and looked at Lila, still frozen by the window. "Deep don't scare me, Marie," he said, voice rough but steady. "But this," he pointed at Lila, then the pots, then back at her. "This is a hell of a mess. You can't taste, and I'm bleedin' for a war I didn't sign up for. What now?" Lila turned, her gray-blue eyes hard again, though they glistened with something wet she wouldn't let fall. "Now we fight," she said, stepping back to the island, her voice stealing. "Victor wants a war? Fine, I've got you, and that's more than he's got. But I need to see that journal." She grabbed her keys from the counter, mud streaked from the fight, and headed for the cellar door, her ponytail swinging with purpose. Remy watched her go, then grabbed the gumbo bowl, sniffing it despite his bruises, his belly rumbling. "Guess we're in it now, huh?" he muttered to Marie, who just shook her head, a faint smile tugging her lips. He took a swig of beer, wincing as it stung his cut, and followed Lila, his boots thudding heavy on the tiles. The steam trailed after him, thick with secrets and spice, as the river outside rolled on, silent witness to a feud older than they knew. The night pressed heavy over the outskirts of New Orleans, a damp, restless dark broken only by the flicker of lightning far off in the distance. Rain had started again, not the pounding deluge of Remy's truck deal, but a steady drizzle that slicked the asphalt of the old highway stretching north from the city. The air smelled of wet earth and exhaust, carried on a breeze that rattled the cypress trees lining the road, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. Inside the borrowed pickup truck, a rusted-out Chevy from Jasper Jazz, Coleman the cab was a cramped, sweaty cage, the dashboard rattling with every bump, the windshield streaked with mud and water. The radio sputtered a faint jazz riff, cutting in and out between bursts of static, and the heater blasted stale air that did little to dry the damp clinging to everything. Remy, Big Rem, Boudreaux hunched over the wheel, his bulk barely fitting behind it, his round belly brushing the steering column with every turn. At 5'5" and 260 pounds, he was a tight squeeze, his Saints t-shirt stretched thin across his chest, sweat-soaked and streaked with mud from the fight days ago, his jeans stiff with dried dirt. His face was a mess. Left eye still swollen half shut, a purple bruise blooming around it, nose crusted with blood, a fresh scab on his lip cracking when he grimaced. His dark hair stuck up in sweaty clumps, and his scruffy jaw glistened with perspiration, the heat and the chase wearing him thin. His thick hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, and his good eye darted between the road and the rearview mirror, where headlights flared closer with every mile. Lila Moreau sat shotgun, her tall frame folded awkwardly into the passenger seat, her knees bumping the glove box. She was a sharp-edged silhouette against the window, blonde hair yanked back in a messy ponytail, strands sticking to her damp neck, gray-blue eyes wide and locked on the side mirror. She wore a faded t-shirt and jeans, the crisp blouse of the kitchen swapped for something practical, but mud still clung to her sneakers, a gritty reminder of the truck brawl. Her hands clutched a dented thermos of gumbo, Remy's last batch, sloshed together in the chaos before they bolted, its heat seeping through the metal into her palms. Her jaw was tight, her breath quick, the weight of Maria's revelation and the journalist's truth still sinking in. Her grandfather's betrayal, Victor's vendetta, a legacy built on stolen spice. Faster, Rem, she said, voice sharp over the engine's growl, her eyes flicking to the mirror again. Two sets of headlights loomed behind them, black SUVs, their engines roaring like predators, gaining ground on the Chevy's rattling frame. They're closing in. Going as fast as this piece of shit'll let me share. Remy snapped back, his Cajun drawl thick with strain, his good eye squinting through the rain-smeared windshield. He stomped the gas, the truck lurching forward with a groan, the speedometer trembling past 60. Jazz oughta be ashamed, thing's got less guts than a gutted fish. His belly jiggled as the truck hit a pothole, jarring them both, and he cursed under his breath, wiping sweat from his brow with a sleeve, smearing blood from his scab across his cheek. The trouble had started hours ago, back at the mansion. After Lila found Claude's journal yellowed pages, confessing how he decut Emile Lebeau out of Bayou Soul, claiming the gumbo recipe that launched Moreau Foods. Victor had upped the ante. A call from Jazz came late, his voice slurred with panic. They got me, Rem Lebeau's boys at the bar, saying you give em the recipe or I'm done. Remy hadn't hesitated, grabbed Lila, the gumbo pot, and Jazz's keys from a hook by the door, and they peeled out, racing to save his friend. But Victor's crew had been waiting, tailing them from the city limits, and now the highway stretched ahead, a slick trap with no exits in sight. Should V stayed put, Lila said, her voice tight as she twisted the thermos lid, steam escaping with a hiss. Called the cops something. Not this. She glanced at him, her ponytail swinging, frustration etching lines around her mouth. Cops don't scare Lebeau. Remy shot back, swerving to avoid a puddle, the truck fishtailing briefly before he wrestled it straight. He's got half the precinct in his pocket, old money, dirty hands. Jazz's family ain't leaving him to rot. His good eye flicked to her, hard and steady despite the bruise. You wanted me in this, share, here I am. She didn't argue, her lips pressing thin as she turned back to the mirror. The SUV's lights glaring brighter now, close enough to see the silhouettes inside, big men, hunched like wolves. The lead vehicle surged forward, its bumper kissing the Chevy's tailgate, a jolt rocking them both. Lila's thermos slipped, splashing gumbo across her lap, the heat searing through her jeans. Shit, she hissed, shoving it onto the dash, her hands fumbling to wipe the mess, the cab filling with the smoky scent of sausage and cayenne. Hold on, Remy barked, yanking the wheel hard left, the truck veering onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. The SUV overshot, its headlights slicing the dark as it swerved to follow, but the second one cut in, ramming their side with a screech of metal. The Chevy shuddered, tilting dangerously, and Remy's arm shot out, pinning Lila to the seat as the wheel spun under his grip. Get off me, she yelled, shoving his arm away, her voice cracking with adrenaline. She grabbed the thermos again, twisting in her seat to face the back window, where the SUVs loomed like twin beasts. "They're gonna flip us, do something." "Doing my damn best," Remy roared, his belly bouncing as he floored it, the engine whining in protest. The truck lurched back onto the pavement, fishtailing through the rain, but the SUVs stuck close, their engines growling louder, headlights blinding in the mirrors. A crack split the air, a gunshot, sharp and close, and the rear windshield shattered, glass spraying across the cab, shards slicing Lila's arm, a thin line of blood blooming red against her skin. "Son of a bitch," Remy bellowed, ducking low, his head brushing the wheel as he swerved again, the truck skidding across lanes. "They're shooting now, Jazz, better be worth this." He glanced at Lila, his good eye wide, blood and sweat mixing on his face. "You hit?" "No, just a scratch," she said, voice shaking as she pressed a hand to her arm, blood smearing her fingers. She grabbed the gumbo pot from the floor, cast iron, heavy as hell, and hefted it up, her breath ragged. "Keep driving, I've got an idea." "What the hell?" Remy started. But she was already moving, kicking open the passenger door, wind and rain blasting in as the truck careened down the highway. She leaned out, the pot clutched tight, her ponytail whipping in the gale, and hurled it with all her strength at the nearest SUV. It smashed through the windshield, a dull thunk followed by a scream, the vehicle swerving wild, tires screeching as it spun off the road, crashing into a ditch with a plume of mud and water. "Holy shit, Cher," Remy shouted, a grin breaking through his bruised face despite the chaos, his belly shaking as he laughed. "You're a damn lunatic, love it." He jerked the wheel again, dodging the second SUV as it lunged to ram them, its driver distracted by the wreck. Lila slammed the door shut, collapsing back into the seat, her chest heaving, blood trickling down her arm. "Shut up and drive," she gasped, wiping rain from her face, her t-shirt soaked and clinging to her ribs. The thermos rolled back to her feet, empty now, and she kicked it aside, her hands trembling but her eyes fierce. The remaining SUV fell back, its headlights dimming as it slowed, either spooked or regrouping, and Remy pushed the truck harder, the engine screaming as they hit 70, the rain a gray blur outside. "Lost M for now," he said, voice rough, his good eye scanning the road ahead, a faint exit sign glowing green in the distance. "Jazz bars 10 miles, gotta get him before they do." Lila nodded, her breath steadying, but her voice cracked when she spoke. "That pot, it was yours, Remington. From your mom." She glanced at him, guilt flickering in her gray-blue eyes, the thermos lying useless between them. Remy's grin faded, his bruised face softening as he kept his gaze on the road, rain streaking the windshield in jagged lines. "Yeah," he said quietly, his thick fingers flexing on the wheel. "She died in a fire kitchen, went up when I was 16. Fought with her that day, spilled the oil myself. Pot's all I kept." He swallowed hard, his belly still against the wheel for once, his voice dropping low. "But it ain't worth Jazz or you, Cher. We're in this now." Lila stared at him, the hum of the engine filling the silence, her hand hovering near his arm but not touching. "I didn't know," she said, voice soft, almost lost in the rain. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he rasped, glancing at her, his good eye glinting with something raw, unguarded. "You threw it like a champ, Mom. D.B. Logan her ass off." He forced a chuckle, his belly jiggling again, but it didn't reach his face this time, the weight of the memory lingering. The truck rattled on, the exit looming closer, headlights gone from the mirrors but the threat still heavy in the air. Lila leaned back, blood and gumbo staining her jeans, her ponytail dripping wet, and gripped the seat as Remy turned off the highway, the bar's neon sign flickering faintly ahead. They were battered, soaked, and running on fumes, but together, for better or worse, in a fight that was only getting uglier. The rain had eased to a faint mist by the time Remy, Big Rem, Boudreaux, and Lila Moreau pulled up to Jazz's bar, a ramshackle dive tucked off a back road 10 miles north of New Orleans. The neon sign, a crooked saxophone with half the letters burned out, buzzed faintly, casting a sickly green glow over the gravel lot. The building itself was a squat box of peeling wood and cracked windows, the roof sagging under years of neglect, a single bulb flickering above the door. The air smelled of stale beer and wet dirt, carried on a breeze that rustled the overgrown weeds choking the lot. Inside the Chevy, the cab was a wrecked glass from the shattered rear windshield crunched underfoot, the dashboard streaked with gumbo and blood, the heater rattling like it might give out any second. Remy slumped behind the wheel, his bulk spilling over the seat, his breathing heavy and ragged. At 5'5" and 260 pounds, he was a bruised mess, his Saints t-shirt soaked with sweat and streaked with mud, jeans stiff with dirt, his round belly heaving with every labored breath. His face told the story of the fight and the chase. Left eye swollen half shut, a purple ring circling it, nose crusted with dried blood, a scabbed cut on his lip oozing fresh red where it split again. His dark hair stuck to his forehead in damp clumps, and his scruffy jaw glistened with sweat, the heat and adrenaline wearing him thin. His thick hands, still trembling from the wheel, fumbled with the keys, shutting off the engine with a groan that matched his own. Lila sat beside him, her tall frame hunched in the passenger seat, her knees brushing the glove box. Her blonde hair hung loose from its ponytail now, wet strands clinging to her neck and cheeks, gray-blue eyes darting between the bar and the dark road behind them. She wore a faded t-shirt and jeans, both soaked and smeared with gumbo, and blood. A thin cut on her arm still trickled red, staining her sleeve. Her hands gripped the empty thermos, its dented metal warm against her palms. Her breath quick and shallow as she scanned the lot. No SUVs, no headlights, just the eerie quiet of the night. "We made it," she said, voice low, almost a whisper, her eyes flicking to Remy. "They're not here yet. Let us get Jazz and go." Remy nodded, wincing as he shifted, his bruised ribs protesting with a sharp stab. "Yeah," he rasped, his Cajun drawl thick with exhaustion. "But if Victor's got him, ain't gonna be no picnic walking in there." He shoved the door open, his boots crunching on the gravel as he hauled himself out, his belly bouncing with the effort. He grabbed a tire iron from the truck bed, rusted but heavy, clutching it like a lifeline, his good eye squinting at the bar's flickering light. Lila followed, her sneakers sinking into the wet gravel, the thermos still in her hand as she stepped up beside him. "You're a mess, Rem," she said, voice tight with worry, her gaze lingering on his battered face. "Let me go first, you can barely stand." Like hell, he shot back, his good eye flashing as he straightened, mud flaking off his jeans. "Jazz is my mess, I'm getting him. You watch my back, Cher." He started for the door, his steps slow and lumbering, the tire iron dragging a faint line in the dirt behind him. The bar's interior hit them like a wall, stale cigarette smoke, sour whiskey, and the faint tang of mildew, all trapped under a low ceiling stained yellow with age. The jukebox in the corner coughed out a warped blues tune, the lights dim and buzzing, casting long shadows over the handful of patrons slouched at the bar, old drunks nursing cheap beers, their eyes glazed and distant. Jazz wasn't among them, but a back door hung ajar, swinging faintly in the draft, a sliver of light spilling out from whatever lay beyond. Remy moved first, his bulk weaving through the tables, his belly brushing chairs as he went, the tire iron gripped tight. Lila stayed close, her steps quick and silent, her thermos raised like a makeshift club. They reached the door, and Remy nudged it open with his boot, peering into a narrow hall, peeling wallpaper, a single bulb swaying overhead, and voices, low and sharp, drifting from a room at the end. "Jazz?" Remy called, his voice a rough bellow that echoed down the hall, his good eye scanning the shadows. No answer, just a shuffle of feet and a muffled curse. He glanced at Lila, nodding once, and pushed forward, his boots thudding heavy on the creaky floor. The room at the end was a storage closet turned hideout, crates of beer stacked against the walls, a card table littered with empty bottles, and Jasper Jazz Coleman slumped in a chair, his lanky frame tied with rope, a gag stuffed in his mouth. His fedora was gone, his dark hair matted with sweat, blood trickling from a split lip down his skinny neck. Two of Victor's goons stood over him, the wiry guy from the truck fight, lip ring glinting, and a new face, broad and scarred, holding a knife to Jazz's throat, the blade catching the light. "Rem," Jazz mumbled through the gag, his eyes wide with panic, his long legs twitching against the ropes. The scarred guy pressed the knife harder. A thin line of blood welling up, and Jazz froze, his breath hitching. Drop the iron, fat man. The wiry one snarled, stepping forward, a crowbar swinging loose in his hand. Recipe SR's now Lebeau says you're done. Remy's good eye blazed, his bruised face twisting as he raised the tire iron, his belly quivering with the effort. "Ain't giving you shit," he growled, voice low and dangerous, his boots planting firm. "Let him go, or I'll bust your skull like your buddy's windshield." The scarred guy smirked, flicking the knife against Jazz's neck, drawing another bead of blood. "Try it," he said, voice cold. "He bleeds out before you swing." Lila stepped up, her thermos raised, her gray-blue eyes locked on the scene. But before she could move, a new voice cut through the room, soft, sharp, and all too familiar. "Enough?" Tessenguin said, stepping out from behind a crate, her small frame dwarfed by the shadows, her black ponytail swinging as she crossed her arms. Her apron was gone, replaced by a leather jacket, her dark eyes glinting with something hard, unreadable. "Tessa?" Lila's voice cracked, the thermos dropping an inch as she stared, disbelief washing over her face. "What the hell?" "Shut it, boss," Tessa snapped, her accent sharp with a bite she'd never shown before. "This ain't personal, it's family. My dad worked for Emile Lebeau, cooked at Bayou Sol till Claude screwed him over. Lost his job, his savings, drank himself dead. Victor's righting that wrong, and I'm with him." She nodded at the goons. "Take him down." The wiry guy lunged, crowbar swinging, and Remy met him head on, the tire iron clashing with a clang that echoed off the crates. His bulk slammed into the man, sending them both crashing into the table, bottles shattering as Remy's fist pounded the guy's jaw, blood spraying. Lila darted for Jazz, but the scarred guy moved faster, shoving her back with a meaty hand, the knife slashing wild. She ducked, the blade grazing her shoulder, a hot sting ripping through her t-shirt as blood bloomed red. "Lila!" Remy roared, shoving the wiry guy off and lunging for the scarred one, his belly bouncing as he swung the tire iron. It caught the man's arm, a sickening crack splitting the air, and the knife clattered to the floor. Jazz kicked out, his bound legs tripping the guy, and Remy tackled him, pinning his bulk atop the thrashing thug, his breath wheezing through bruised ribs. Tessa grabbed the crowbar from the floor, her small hand steady as she raised it, but Lila was faster, slamming the thermos into Tessa's wrist with a dull thud. Tessa yelped, the weapon dropping, and Lila shoved her back, pinning her against a crate, her gray-blue eyes blazing. "You sold us out," she hissed, voice shaking with fury, blood dripping down her arm. "For what?" Victor's lies. "It's not lies." Tessa spat, struggling under Lila's grip, her ponytail whipping. "Your family ruined mine, I'm taking it back." She kicked, catching Lila's shin, but Lila held firm, her breath ragged. Remy staggered up, the scarred guy out cold beneath him, and stumbled to Jazz, yanking the gag free and slicing the ropes with the dropped knife, his thick fingers fumbling but quick. "You okay, man?" he rasped, his good eye darting to Lila and Tessa, his belly heaving as he stood. Jazz coughed, spitting blood, his voice hoarse. "Been better, Rem, thanks for the save." He rubbed his wrists, red and raw, and nodded at Tessa. "She showed up with M, thought she was your girl." "Not anymore," Lila said, shoving Tessa down into the chair Jazz had vacated, her hands trembling but firm. She turned to Remy, blood streaking her t-shirt, her face pale but fierce. "We've got bigger problems." Victor's not stopping. Before Remy could answer, his phone buzzed, Maria's name flashing on the cracked screen. He answered, his bruised face tightening as her voice crackled through, urgent and low. "Get back here, boy. Lebeau's boys hit the house. I'm fine, but they're looking for something. You're in deep now." "Shit," Remy muttered, pocketing the phone, his good eye meeting Lila's. "Gotta move. Share house ain't safe." He grabbed Jazz's arm, hauling him up, his bulk swaying with the effort. Lila nodded, her gaze flicking to Tessa, still glaring from the chair. "What about her?" "Let her rot," Remy said, voice hard, his belly quivering as he turned for the door. "We've got a fight to finish." He paused, then grabbed a crate of beer, hefting it under one arm despite the pain, his good eye glinting. "But first gumbo. Ain't leavin' without a pot." They stumbled back to the truck, Jazz limping, Lila bleeding, Remy battered but unbroken, the night closing in as the bar's neon flickered behind them. The fight had shifted, betrayal cut deep, and Victor's war was heating up, a storm they couldn't outrun yet. The air inside Lila Moreau's mansion hung heavy with the acrid bite of smoke and the lingering spice of gumbo, a bitter mix that stung the nose and clung to the back of the throat. It was past midnight, the Mississippi outside a black mirror under a moonless sky, its slow churn the only sound breaking the eerie quiet of the house. The kitchen, once a gleaming shrine to wealth, was a wreckage, cabinet doors hung off their hinges, drawers yanked out and spilling silverware across the tile, the granite island smeared with ash where a pot had been overturned. The high windows were cracked, jagged lines spiderwebbing the glass, letting in a damp breeze that rustled the scattered rice grains and onion peels. Victor's goons had torn through like a hurricane, leaving chaos in their wake, and the faint hum of the fridge was the only sign the place still had power. Remy, Big Rem, Boudreaux slumped against the counter, his bulk sagging with exhaustion, his breath wheezing through bruised ribs. At 5'5" and 260 pounds, he was a battered hulk, his Saints t-shirt soaked with sweat and streaked with mud, jeans stiff with dirt and blood, his round belly rising and falling like a bellows. His face was a map of pain, left eye swollen half shut, a purple ring circling it, nose crusted with dried blood, a scabbed cut on his lip cracked and oozing. His dark hair stuck to his forehead in damp clumps, and his scruffy jaw glistened with sweat, the fight and the chase draining him dry. His thick hands, still trembling from the bar brawl, gripped a dented beer can he salvaged from Jazz's crate, the aluminum cold against his bruised knuckles as he took a shaky swig. Lila stood by the cellar door, her tall frame rigid, her gray-blue eyes scanning the destruction with a mix of fury and dread. Her blonde hair hung loose now, wet strands framing her sharp cheekbones, her faded t-shirt and jeans smeared with gumbo and blood, a thin cut on her arm still wept red, staining her sleeve, a fresh slash on her shoulder from the bar adding to the mess. She clutched a flashlight, its beam cutting through the dim kitchen, her other hand gripping the cellar key she defished from a broken drawer, its brass edge digging into her palm. Her breath was quick, her jaw tight, the weight of Tessa's betrayal and Marries' warning pressing down like a stone. Jazz leaned against the wall near the door, his lanky frame hunched, still shaky from his ordeal. His dark hair was matted with sweat and blood, a split lip swollen and red, his skinny neck marked with rope burns. He lost his fedora in the bar, and his tie hung loose, the end frayed where it caught on something. He nursed a beer Remy had tossed him, his long fingers trembling as he sipped, his voice hoarse when he spoke. "They hit hard, Rem," he said, nodding at the wreckage. "Lebeau's not plain what Marie say thereafter?" "Something," Remy rasped, his Cajun drawl thick with fatigue, his good eye flicking to Lila. "Didn't he say what just that they're lookin'? Figure it's tied to that journal, share." He took another swig, wincing as the beer stung his lip, his belly quivering with the effort. "We're sittin' ducks here, gotta move fast." Lila didn't answer, her flashlight beam sweeping the kitchen one last time before she turned to the cellar door, her ponytail swinging as she shoved the key into the lock. "Then let us find it," she said, voice sharp, her hand twisting until the bolt clicked free. "If Victor wants something down there, I need to know what and why." She pushed the door open, a creak echoing through the house, and started down the narrow stairs, her sneakers thudding soft on the wood. Remy followed, his boots heavy and slow, his bulk brushing the walls as he descended, the tire iron still clutched in one hand, beer in the other. Jazz trailed behind, his long legs unsteady, the beer can sloshing as he gripped the railing. The cellar smelled of damp stone and old wine, a cool, musty tang that cut through the smoke upstairs. Shelves lined the walls, bottles glinting in the flashlight's beam, Pinots and Merlots collecting dust, their labels faded with age. At the far end, a wooden chest sat beneath a cobwebbed shelf, its lid warped and scratched, a rusty padlock hanging loose like it'd been pried open. "They've been here," Lila said, her voice tight as she crouched by the chest, the flashlight illuminating a jumble of papers and photos spilling out, some charred at the edges, others torn. She pulled the lid up fully, the hinges groaning, and dug through the mess, her hands trembling as she sifted through decades of secrets. Remy loomed behind her, his good eye squinting in the dim light, his belly brushing her shoulder as he leaned closer. "What's that?" he asked, pointing a thick finger at a yellowed envelope sticking out from the pile, its edges singed black, the name Henri scrawled in shaky ink across the front. Lila's breath caught, her fingers snatching it up, the paper crinkling as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet, folded tight, the handwriting her father slanted, hurried, stained with what looked like coffee or tears. She held the flashlight steady, her gray-blue eyes scanning the words, her voice trembling as she read aloud. "Lila, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Forgive me, I tried to fix it with Emile, but he wouldn't listen. Claude took everything from him, and I couldn't live with it. Went to him that night, offered half the company back, thought it'd end the hate. He said I'd pay like my father did. Next day, Victor's car hit mine. Wasn't an accident, tell the truth if you can. Love you, kid." The seller went silent, the words sinking in like lead, the flashlight beam wavering as Lila's hand shook. She dropped the letter, her knees buckling, and sank to the cold stone floor, her face pale, eyes glistening wet. "He knew," she whispered, voice breaking. "Dad knew Victor killed him and he was trying to fix it. All this time." Remy crouched beside her, his bulk awkward on the low floor, his good eye soft despite the bruises. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, picking up the letter, his thick fingers tracing the ink. "Lebeau's been playing this game longer 'en we thought, Cher. Your old man, he had guts, going to a meal like that." He set the paper down, his beer can clanking against the stone, and rested a hand on her shoulder, heavy but gentle. Jazz stepped closer, his long shadow stretching across the chest, his voice rough. "So Victor's after this? Proof he offed Henri? No wonder he's tearing shit up, could bury him." "Could," Lila said, her voice steadying as she wiped her eyes, her gray-blue gaze hardening. "But he's got Tessa, now knows we're on to him." ELL hit harder. She stood, clutching the letter, her ponytail swinging as she turned to Remy. "We've got to end this. Taste of the Bayou is 2 weeks off. We win, we expose him." Remy nodded, hauling himself up with a groan, his belly quivering as he steadied against the wall. "Damn right," he rasped, his good eye glinting. "But we're running on fumes. Share Jazz's beat. I'm half dead, and you're bleedin'. What's the play?" Before she could answer, a crash echoed from upstairs, glass shattering, boots thudding, voices barking orders. Lila's head snapped up, her flashlight beam swinging wild, and Remy grabbed the tire iron, his bruised face tightening. "They're back," he growled, his belly heaving as he moved for the stairs. "Stay low, Jazz, cover her." Jazz grabbed a broken bottle from the chest, his long fingers wrapping around the neck, his split lip curling in a grim smile. "Got it, Rem," he said, stepping beside Lila, who clutched the letter tight, her gray-blue eyes blazing with resolve. They crept up the stairs, the kitchen a blur of shadows and smoke as 3 goons tore through big men, tattooed and armed, one swinging a bat, another clutching a knife, the third barking into a phone. "They're here, find it." Remy didn't wait, he charged, his bulk slamming into the bat guy, the tire iron cracking against his knee with a sickening crunch. The man howled, dropping, and Remy took a fist to the jaw, blood spraying as his scab split wide, his good eye watering but fierce. Lila darted for the island, grabbing a fallen skillet cast iron, heavy as the one she dethroned, and swung it at the knife guy, catching his shoulder with a thud. He staggered, the blade clattering, and Jazz lunged, smashing the bottle over his head, glass raining down as the man crumpled. The third goon bolted, phone dropping as he ran, but the damage was done, the kitchen a war zone, the fight spilling into the night. Remy slumped against the counter, blood dripping down his chin, his belly heaving as he clutched his ribs. Bastards, he wheezed, his good eye flicking to Lila, who stood panting, skillet in hand, blood streaking her arm. They're gone for now. What's next, Cher? Lila held up the letter, her voice steel despite the tremble. We hide this, then we hit back. Victor S. not just after gumbo, he s after blood. We got to be ready. She turned to the stairs, her flashlight cutting the dark, Jazz and Remy falling in behind. Their battered trio forged tighter by the fire they couldn't escape. The night of the Taste of the Bayou Festival buzzed with life in the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter. A chaotic symphony of jazz horns and sizzling grills under a sky streaked with stars. The air hung thick with the scents of frying beignet, smoked sausage, and cayenne-spiked gumbo, curling up from rows of booths draped in red and gold banners. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a warm glow over the cobblestone streets, where crowds jostled locals in faded tees, tourists clutching beers, kids darting through with powdered sugar on their cheeks. The main stage loomed at the end of the square, a wooden platform flanked by judges' tables, its spotlight cutting through the humid dark, the hum of anticipation crackling like static. Remy Big Rem Boudreaux stood behind a rickety booth near the stage, his bulk hunched over a massive cast iron pot, steam billowing up to fog his bruised face. At 5'5" and 260 pounds, he was a walking war zone, his Saints t-shirt stretched tight over his round belly, soaked with sweat and streaked with rue, jeans stiff with 2 weeks of grit. His left eye was still half swollen, a fading purple ring circling it. His nose crusted with old blood, a scabbed cut on his lip cracking as he muttered to himself. His dark hair stuck up in sweaty spikes, and his scruffy jaw glistened under the lights, the heat of the pot and the night wearing him thin. His thick hands, one bandaged from the bar fight, the other raw, stirred the gumbo with a wooden spoon. His good eye fixed on the bubbling mix of sausage, okra, and a roux so dark it looked like midnight. Lila Moreau paced beside him, her tall frame taut with nerves, her gray-blue eyes darting between the pot and the crowd. She was a sharp contrast to Remy's chaos, blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, strands gleaming under the lights, her lean figure clad in a simple black tank top and jeans, mud-free for once but streaked with flour from helping. The cut on her arm had scabbed over, a thin red line peeking from her sleeve, her shoulder still tender from the knife graze. She clutched Henriette's letter in her pocket, its crinkled edges digging into her thigh, a lifeline and a weapon she'd kept hidden since the cellar fight. Her sharp cheekbones caught the glow, her lips pressed thin, every step a coiled spring ready to snap. The booth was a makeshift fortress. Jazz's battered sacks leaned against a crate, his lanky frame slouched nearby, sipping water instead of beer. His split lip healed but his eyes still shadowed from the bar. Marie Thibodeau sat on a folding chair, her thin hands folded over a basket of peppers, her gray bun tight, her dark eyes scanning the crowd with a quiet intensity. The gumbo pot hissed, its steam curling up like a beacon, drawing stares from passers-by, some curious, some hungry, a few whispering Remy's name like a ghost from the old days. 2 minutes. Rem? Lila said, voice low and urgent, her ponytail swinging as she checked her watch. Judges are circling Victor S. booth S. packed. We've got to nail this. She glanced across the square, where Victor Leboe's setup gleamed polished steel, a neon Cajun King logo, his goons hovering like wolves, Tessa among them, her ponytail bobbing as she ladled gumbo with a cold smirk. Remy grunted, his good eye squinting through the steam, his belly brushing the table as he leaned over the pot. Ain't about nailing it, Cher, he rasped, his Cajun drawl thick with strain, his bandaged hand stirring slow. This about hard gumbo-s gotta sing, not just sit there. This one-s gotta trust me. He scooped a ladleful, the dark broth thick with memory, and poured it into a bowl, his thick fingers trembling but sure. The crowd parted as the judges approached, 3 figures in crisp shirts, clipboards in hand, their faces stern under the spotlight. Lila stepped forward, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. Remy Boudreaux's gumbo, she said, handing over the bowl, her gray-blue eyes locking on theirs. Made with soul, not stolen. The jab hung subtle, a dart aimed at Victor, who stood across the square, his tall frame rigid in a white suit, his salt and pepper hair glinting, his dark eyes narrowing as he watched. The judges tasted, spoons clinking, their murmurs low as the crowd hushed, the jazz fading to a soft hum. Remy wiped his brow with a sleeve, his belly quivering, his good eye darting between them, sweat dripping down his bruised jaw. Lila's hands clenched at her sides, her breath shallow, Henriette's letter burning in her pocket like a coal. Then the head judge, a wiry man with a gray mustache, nodded, scribbling fast, and the booth erupted in quiet hope, Jazz's grin flashing, Maria's shoulders easing, Lila's lips twitching upward. But Victor wasn't done. He strode to the stage, his white suit stark against the wood, his voice booming through a mic as the judges stepped back. "Folks," he said, his tone smooth and sharp, "that gumbo over there? Stolen same as Moreau food stole from my daddy, Émile Lebeau. Claude Moreau took Bayou Soul, kicked him out, built an empire on lies. Boudreaux's just their hired hand, ain't nothing original in that pot." He pointed at Remy, his finger a spear, the crowd murmuring, heads turning. Remy's good eye blazed, his bruised face twisting as he lumbered forward, his belly bouncing with every step. "Bullshit," he roared, voice cutting through the square, his spoon raised like a weapon. "That pot's mine, my mom's, my sweat, my damn soul. You wanna talk stolen, Lebeau? Taste it, my heart's in there, not your daddy's ghost." He slammed the spoon down, the clang ringing out, his bandaged hand shaking but firm. Lila seized the moment, climbing onto the booth's table, her sneakers scuffing the wood as she pulled Henriette's letter from her pocket, holding it high. "Yes, right," she shouted, her voice raw and fierce, her ponytail whipping in the breeze. "Victor's lying, Claude wronged Émile, yeah, but my dad, Henri, tried to fix it. Offered half the company back, Victor killed him for it." This, she waved the letter, its singed edges catching the light. "This proves it. He's no victim, he's a murderer." The crowd gasped, a ripple of shock spreading, phones flashing as people filmed. Victor's face darkened, his white suit creasing as he stepped forward, voice icy. "Lies Moreau trash. All of it. That's my daddy's recipe stolen from Bayou Soul." "Then prove it," Lila shot back, jumping down, her gray-blue eyes blazing as she grabbed Remy's bowl and thrust it at him. "Taste the truth, Victor, go on." She shoved it into his hands, the broth sloshing, her breath ragged with defiance. Victor hesitated, his dark eyes flicking between her and the crowd, the mic trembling in his grip. The judges watched, the square silent but for the gumbo's faint bubble. He lifted the spoon, his lips curling in a sneer, and tasted once, twice, his face shifting, a flicker of something, memory, maybe, or defeat crossing his sharp features. Then he froze, the spoon clattering to the stage, his voice breaking as he gripped the mic. "I killed him," he rasped, the words spilling out, raw and unbidden. "Henri, I'd do it again. Moreau took everything, everything." He dropped the mic, the feedback screeching, and bolted, shoving through the crowd as cops surged forward, cuffs gleaming under the lights. The square erupted shouts, cheers, chaos as Victor's goons scattered, Tessa vanishing in the fray. Remy staggered to Lila's side, his good eye wide, his bruised face slack with shock. "Holy shit, Cher," he wheezed, his belly heaving as he clutched her arm, his bandaged hand warm against her skin. "You did it," he cracked. "We did it," she corrected, her voice trembling but fierce, her gray-blue eyes meeting his, sweat and flour streaking her cheeks. She grabbed his good hand, squeezing tight, the letter still clutched in her other, its truth ringing louder than the crowd. The head judge stepped up, mic in hand, his voice cutting through the din. "Remy Boudreaux winner, taste of the Bayou. Best gumbo hands down." The crowd roared, Jazz's sax blasting a triumphant note, Marie clapping her thin hands, tears glinting in her eyes. Remy grinned, gap tooth flashing despite the bruises, his belly jiggling as he pulled Lila close, his sweat-soaked shirt brushing her tank top. "Told ya? Cher heart wins," he rasped, his good eye sparkling under the lights. "Lebeau's done, gumbo's ours." Lila nodded, her ponytail falling loose, strands sticking to her neck as she leaned into him, her breath steadying. Yeah, she said softly, the letter crinkling in her grip. Ours. The stage lights flared, the crowd pressed in, and the gumbo steamed on. A victory forged in blood, spice, and a truth that broke the night wide open. The sun hung low over the Mississippi 2 weeks after the taste of the bayou, painting the riverbank in shades of orange and pink, a soft glow that softened the edges of the world. Salt Soul sat perched on the waterous edge, a modest shack of weathered wood and tin, its slanted roof patched with fresh shingles, a far cry from the gleaming Moreau mansion. The porch stretched wide, strung with mismatched lanterns that flickered in the dusk, casting pools of light over rough-hewn tables and chairs scavenged from thrift shops. The air carried the warm, earthy scent of gumbo simmering inside, mingling with the sharp tang of faux broth and the faint musk of river mud, a blend that felt like home, raw and real. Lila Moreau stood behind the counter, her tall frame bent over a cutting board, a chef's knife flashing as she sliced green onions with a precision she'd picked up from watching Remy. Her blonde hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, strands slipping free to frame her sharp cheekbones. Her gray-blue eyes focused but softer now, free of the tension that had haunted them for months. She wore a faded black tank top and jeans, flour dusting her arms, the scabbed cut on her shoulder a faint memory under the fabric. The kitchen was small but alive, 2 stoves humming, pots bubbling, a chalkboard menu scrawled with gumbo free tonight and faux $5. A promise they'd kept since opening. She paused, wiping her hands on a rag, and tasted a spoonful of gumbo from a simmering pot, smoky, rich, with a kick that danced on her tongue, her first real taste in 20 years. A smile tugged her lips, small but genuine, the sensation still a marvel. Remy Big Rem, Boudreaux lumbered in from the porch, his bulk filling the doorway, a crate of peppers under one arm, his round belly bouncing with every step. At 5'5" and 260 pounds, he was a walking testament to the fight. His Saints t-shirt stretched tight, patched with sweat and spice, jeans worn thin at the knees. His bruises had faded but lingered, the purple ring around his left eye now a faint shadow, his nose still crooked from the truck brawl, a healed scab on his lip barely visible under his scruffy jaw. His dark hair stuck up in sweaty clumps, and his thick hands, one still bandaged from the bar, set the crate down with a thud. His good eye glinting as he sniffed the air. Smells like heaven in here, share, he rasped, his Cajun drawl warm and rough, his belly quivering as he grinned, gap tooth flashing. Better be, Lila said, her voice light as she slid the onions into the pot, stirring with a wooden spoon. You taught me, can't screw it up now. She glanced at him, her gray-blue eyes catching his, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them, gratitude. Maybe, or more. He chuckled, a low rumble that shook his frame, and shuffled to the stove, his boots scuffing the wood floor. Taught you good. Huh? Look at you choppin' like a pro, tastin' like you mean it. He leaned over the pot, his belly brushing the counter, and scooped a ladleful, blowing steam off before sipping. His tongue couldn't feel it. Not since the surgery, but his good eye closed, his face softening like he could taste it anyway. Damn, he muttered, setting the ladle down. Still got it, Mom-s in there, every bit. Lila nodded, her smile widening as she turned to the wall behind them, a trio of faded photos in chipped frames. Claude Moreau, Emile Lebeau, and Adele Boudreaux, smiling from a time before the hate took root. She desold Moreau Foods after the festival cashed out the empire built on her grandfather's theft, let it crumble under new hands, and poured the money into this place. A peace offering to the past. They're all here, she said softly, her voice steady but thick with meaning. No more fighting, just this. Remy followed her gaze, his good eye lingering on Adele's face, her warm smile frozen in sepia. Yeah, he rasped, his thick hand resting on the counter, fingers brushing the frame. Took a hell of a ride to bury that mess, Claude, Emile, all of it. Victor S. locked up, Tessa S. gone quiet. We did right by M. Cher. He paused, his belly stilling for a beat, then grinned again. And free gumbo tonight, gonna pack this joint. The door creaked open, and Jasper Jazz Coleman stepped in, his lanky frame ducking under the low lintel, a battered sax case slung over his shoulder. His dark hair was combed back, his split lip healed. A new fedora tipped low over his eyes, sober now. 3 months and counting. The bar fight a distant scar. Why already? He said, voice rough but bright, setting the case down. Folks are linen up, smell s dragon m in like flies. He nodded at the pot, his long fingers tapping the counter, a grin splitting his face. Marie Thibodeau followed, her thin frame draped in a faded shawl, gray bun tight as ever, her dark eyes glinting with quiet pride. She carried a basket of cornbread, its golden crust steaming, and set it beside the gumbo, her hands steady despite her age. Heard the chatter, she said, her voice raspy, nodding at Lila and Remy. They're callin' it the best damn spot in town, your mom d be proud. Boy. And your daddy, girl he d see this as fixin' what broke. Lila's throat tightened, her hand pausing mid-stir. Henri's letter flashing in her mind, his plea to end the hate. Now folded safe in a drawer upstairs. Hope so, she said softly, her gray-blue eyes meeting Marie's. Then Remy's, a weight lifting as she spoke. We're done running. Remy shuffled closer, his bulk brushing her side. His good eye warm as he slung an arm around her shoulders, awkward with the height gap, his thick hand settling on her arm. Damn right. Cher, he said, his voice low, his belly quivering against her hip. This is us, new pot, new start. LeBeau's ghost can rest now. He squeezed her once, then let go, lumbering to the door to prop it open. The porch filling with the first wave of locals, dock workers, musicians, a fisherman with a toothless grin, all drawn by the promise of free gumbo. Lila watched him go, her smile steadying as she turned back to the pot, ladling bowls with a rhythm she learned from him, slow, deliberate. Each scoop a piece of the piece they fought for. Jazz picked up his sax, a soulful riff curling through the shack, the notes weaving with the chatter as people filed in, bowls in hand, voices rising over the clink of spoons. Marie sliced cornbread, her thin hands quick, passing squares to outstretched hands, her quiet hum blending with the music. The night stretched on, the shack alive with laughter and steam, the river outside a silent witness to the shift. Claude's theft, Emilius' ruin, Henri's death, Victor's fall, all simmering down to this. Lila handed a bowl to a grizzled old man, his thanks a nod, and caught Remy's eye across the room, his bulk wedged between tables, his grin wide as he poured beer from a crate. She tasted the gumbo again, the spice sharp and alive on her tongue, and felt it. Henri's hope, Adela's soul, a new recipe born from the ashes. Worth it, she muttered to herself, her voice lost in the din, her gray-blue eyes glinting with something fierce and free. The lantern swayed, the gumbo bubbled, and Salt Soul stood firm, a shack, a truce, a home they built from the wreckage of a war no one else could end. The night had settled deep over Salt Soul, the last of the crowd trickling out into the cool New Orleans air, their voices fading down the gravel path toward the city's distant hum. The Mississippi rolled slow and steady beyond the shack's porch, its surface a black mirror flecked with silver under a waxing moon. The gentle lap of water against the bank, a quiet rhythm beneath the night's hush. The lanterns still glowed, their flickering light swaying in the breeze, casting long shadows over the wooden tables now empty but for a few crumpled napkins and half-drunk beers. Inside, the kitchen was silent, the gumbo pot cooling on the stove, its rich scent smoke, sausage, cayenne lingering like a ghost in the air, mingling with the faint tang of faux broth and the earthy musk of river dampness. Remy, Big Rem Boudreaux, sat heavy on the porch steps, his bulk spilling over the edges, his round belly resting against his thighs like a tired drum. At 5'5" and 260 pounds, he was a worn monument, his Saints t-shirt patched with sweat and flour, jeans faded and stiff with weeks of grit, his thick frame slouched from the long night. His bruises had softened into faint echoes, the purple ring around his left eye a dull shadow, his nose still crooked but healed, the scab on his lip a thin line under his scruffy jaw. His dark hair stuck up in sweaty clumps, damp from the humid night, and his good eye glinted soft under the lantern glow, tracing the river a slow dance. His thick hands, one still faintly bandaged, cradled a dented beer can, the aluminum warm from his grip, and he took a slow sip, the fizz a quiet comfort against the stillness. Lila Moreau leaned against the porch railing beside him, her tall frame stretched out, one leg dangling over the edge, her sneakers brushing the grass below. Her blonde hair hung loose now, freed from its ponytail, strands curling soft around her sharp cheekbones, catching the moonlight like threads of gold. She wore the same black tank top and jeans, flour dusting her arms, the scabbed cut on her shoulder a faint mark of the past under the fabric. Her gray-blue eyes followed the river, steady and calm, a far cry from the storm they'd held months ago. She held a chipped mug of gumbo, its steam long gone, the broth cold but still rich on her tongue as she sipped a taste she'd fought for, a miracle she still marveled at. Her other hand rested light on the rail, fingers tapping a slow beat, the weight of Henri's letter tucked safe upstairs easing with every breath. The shack behind them stood quiet, its weathered wood creaking faintly in the breeze, the photos of Claude, Emile, and Adele watching from the wall inside a trio of ghosts at peace, their feud buried in the gumbo that fed the night. Jazz had packed up his sacks an hour ago, his lanky frame shuffling off with a tired grin, promising to play again tomorrow. Marie had left too, her basket empty, her thin hands patting Remy's shoulder with a whispered, "You done good, boy," before she vanished into the dark. The crowd, dock workers, musicians, locals who tasted the free gumbo had drifted away, their laughter and clinking spoons a memory that warmed the silence. "Long damn night," Remy said, breaking the quiet, his Cajun drawl rough but soft, his good eye flicking to Lila as he shifted on the step, his belly quivering with the move. "Packed em in, though gumbo es a hit, share. Mom be Logan big Rem feedin' the whole damn town. She say." He chuckled, a low rumble that shook his frame, the beer can sloshing as he raised it in a mock toast to the river. Lila smiled, small and real, her mug resting on her knee as she leaned back, her gray-blue eyes catching his. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady, warm with a trace of wonder. "They kept coming, couldn't get enough. You were right, heart wins." She sipped the gumbo again, the spice a sharp spark on her tongue, and shook her head, a soft laugh escaping. "Still can't believe I can taste it every bite like I don't know. Like waking up." Remy's grin widened, gap tooth flashing as he set the beer down, his thick hand brushing the step beside him, leaving a smear of flour. "Told ya, share gumbo's magic even if I can't feel it no more." He tapped his temple, his good eye glinting with memory. "Mom burned it in here, every trick, every taste. Don't need my tongue when I've got that." He paused, his belly stilling, his voice dropping low. "Worth it, why no giving it up? Seeing you taste it? That's my win." Lila's smile faded, her mug lowering as she turned to him, her gray-blue eyes searching his battered face. "You didn't have to, Rem," she said, voice soft but firm, her fingers tightening on the rail. "Your taste, your mom's gift, I took that from you. I still feel it, every time I eat this." She nodded at the mug, guilt flickering in her gaze, a shadow from the surgery that saved her and cost him. He shook his head, his good eye steady, his thick hand reaching out to rest on hers, warm and rough against her skin. "Ein tea taken, share given," he rasped, his belly brushing her leg as he leaned closer, his voice thick with truth. "Lost my taste, found us damn good trade. Mom smack me if I whined about it, she say, 'Boy, you cook with your soul, not your mouth.' And I do." He squeezed her hand once, then let go, his grin creeping back. "Besides, you're tastin' for me now. That's enough." She held his gaze, her throat tight, the mug warm against her knee as she nodded slow, the guilt easing under his words. "Okay," she said, voice barely above a whisper, her gray-blue eyes glistening wet for a beat before she blinked it away. Yeah, that's enough." She leaned back, her shoulder brushing his, the height gap awkward but right, their silence settling like the river's calm. They sat there a while, the night stretching out, the lanterns swaying overhead as the breeze carried the faint hum of crickets and the river a song. Remy took another sip of beer, his belly quivering as he shifted, his good eye drifting to the water. Why no, he said, voice low, reflective, started with that damn truck rain. Laboes goons, all that mess. Thought I was done. Share broke. Busted. Just a fat fool with a pot. Then you showed up, crazy deal and all. Lila chuckled, her mug tilting as she sipped again. The gumbo's heat a quiet fire on her tongue. Craziest right, she said, her voice warm, teasing. $1,000,000, and you picked me 6 months of hell for gumbo. Victor S. War. Tessa S. Knife thought we D never make it. She glanced at the shack. It's weathered with glowing soft under the lanterns. But here we are salt soul. Dad D laughed. Lila, you traded an empire for a shack? Best shack in town. Remy shot back, his grin wide, his good eye twinkling as he nudged her with his elbow, his belly jiggling against her side. Empire S just money, this is real. Fed em tonight, made em smile. Claude, Emile, they D never get it. Took blood to bury that feud, but we did it. She nodded, her gray-blue eyes drifting to the river. Henri's letter flashing in her mind, his plea to fix it. Now answered in this place. Yeah, she said softly, her voice thick with memory. Dad tried, Victor stopped him. We finished it, truth S out, gumbo S ours. No more running. She set the mug down, her hand resting beside his, their fingers brushing, a quiet anchor in the night. Remy followed her gaze, his good eye tracing the water's slow roll, his thick hand flexing on the step. Mom D say the same, he rasped, his voice dropping low, rough with the past. Fire took her, my fault, spillin' that oil. Carried it till you, share gumbo S my piece now, this place. You're my flavor, don't need to taste it to know. He grinned, gap tooth flashing, his belly quivering as he leaned back, the step creaking under his weight. Lila turned to him, her gray-blue eyes soft, steady, her hands sliding over his, warm against his callous skin. You're mine too, she said, voice quiet but sure, her smile small and real. Took a hell of a ride truck. Chase, Victor as shit, but you're my flavor now. Remington. This she nodded at the shack, the river, the night. This is us. He chuckled, a low rumble that shook his frame, his good eye glinting as he squeezed her hand, his thick fingers dwarfing hers. Damn right. Share, he said, his voice warm, his belly brushing her arm as he shifted closer. From chaos to calm, worth every bruise. He raised his beer can, clinking it against her mug, the faint ring echoing over the water. They sat there, hands linked, the river rolling on, the lanterns swaying soft above them. The gumbo cooled inside, the shack stood firm, and the past Claude's theft, Emile's ruin, Henri's death, Victor's fall faded into the night, a story told and done. Salt Soul glowed behind them, a shack built from blood and spice, a home where the fight ended and the flavor began, a reflection on the river, steady and true.